Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Some have called him a social activist. Some have even called him the movie star. His Harlem Children's Zone was described by Time magazine as perhaps the most profound social experiment in U.S. history. They've named him America's Best Leaders. They've even called him angry at times. But first and foremost, he is a passionate educator, and an educator who, with his words, but more importantly, his actions over the last few decades, have actually created a model that is inspiring people. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Geoffrey Canada.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Y'all have to really be nicer to me than that, because you got me in trouble. And I know you're wondering, what do we do to get Jeff in trouble? So, Sonny, everybody knows it's like impossible to get me to go anywhere overnight because my wife and I, we have 4 kids, but the youngest is 16 now. The oldest is 45. But it's a long story. I'm not getting into that story tonight. But needless to say, I'm trying not to leave my 16-year-old. So I was on the West Coast, and my wife knew I was going. But when I said, oh, I'm going to be gone for 4 days, she said, why? I said, I'm going to Dubai because in one place we're going to have the top educators from all over the world, and they have literally millions of children's lives in their hands. She was not moved by that. Then I said, honey, but they love me. And then y'all didn't treat me very nice, so I don't know about that. Thank you, that's so much better. I know I saw Fareed, and Fareed, I was actually watching you on CNN upstairs, and I know he's going to be doing something with President Clinton. I love President Clinton. And when he was in office, we did some work together. But he probably doesn't remember the first time he saw me. So I'll have to just share this quick story with you. So I'm in Washington at a conference, sort of like this, it's by the Children's Defense Fund, and we have a freak snowstorm in Washington, and it shuts down Washington, D.C., and I can't get home. And a friend of mine worked for the First Lady. The Clintons were in the White House then, and she called me, and she said, Jeff, what are you doing tonight? I said, I'm stuck in Washington. I can't go anywhere. She says, well, do you want to come by the White House and watch a movie? You know how sometimes you're a little slow? I said, what's playing? Right? She said, duh, we're going to watch the movie with the First Lady and the President. I was like, oh, yes, the President, I want to go see the movie. So this is not a regular function. The President, he's just been elected. He has friends coming from Arkansas to spend some time with him, and I'm just there as a guest. So the movie is in the coat room, and they have all of these nice refreshments set out. Not the usual popcorn, and I mean the good stuff, right? And so I'm there, and I'm just having a ball. They're not there yet. And I shouldn't tell you this, but it's true. If you go to an event like that, the napkins have the gold embossed presidential seal on them. I took a few of those napkins, and I know the Secret Service was like, the black guy is already stealing, watch him, right? But you know what? But this is why I did it, though, right? Because I knew, right, in 24 hours I was going to be back in Harlem. And they were going to say, so what did you do this weekend? And I was going to say, oh, I was hanging out with the president. We saw a movie. And they were going to say, get out of here. And I was going to reach in my pocket and say, bam, look at that, baby. So, what the president, I think, does know is that he created something that actually helped me launch the Harlem Children's Zone, a national service program that we call AmeriCorps in the States. And let me tell you what it was. It was a call to service in the most disadvantaged communities in our country, where young people were going to take the major role of fixing their communities. And let me tell you why this was important to me. I don't know if you've ever been in a failed state. I mean, a real failed state, in a place where there is no law and order, that all of the institutions have broken down, that people literally don't know how they're going to survive. Harlem was such a state when I began working there in the 80s. Predominantly African American. The schools were so horrible that no one expected kids to be successful. And I was trained as an educator, and I went to undergrad school, and I went to the Harvard Ed School, and I thought my job was going to be helping kids figure out how to read and write. Every 3 or 4 weeks, I was having a kid murdered. And you know, after you go to about 5 or 6 funerals for kids in their teens, you begin to think that there has to be something we can do about this. And so I began to try and figure out, what do you do when you have systems that basically have given up on young people? And let me tell you what happened in the States. I was dealing with Harlem, but this was going on in many poor places around this country. We had developed a policy where we knew in some places kids were not going to get an education. We knew it. We knew it because they hadn't gotten an education in 20, 30 years. And we decided our answer was going to be that when those kids, most of the guys, got to be in their late teens, we would just have enough jails to make sure we could lock all of them up. And right now, in our country, we incarcerate more people per capita than any place on the face of the earth. I mean, if you just type in incarceration rates worldwide, United States, #1, 743 people per 100,000. No one's even close to us. Now, you just think about what this looks like for me in Harlem. Now, Harlem's in Manhattan. In my community, no one is making it. You go 30 blocks from there, and everyone's making it. Now, who are those everyones that's making it? They tend to be more affluent, tend to be white. And when I would ask people, what can we do about it? They basically say, there's nothing you can do about this. There's just nothing you can do. When I went to the educators and I asked them what they were going to do, they said, well, we're going to do what we did last year. Now, here's a problem. Now, before tonight is over, I'm going to say some things that some of you who maybe thought you liked me and not going to like me so much. But we have a problem in education that there is no downside for failure. We've created a system where failure is accepted in some places, and we actually have a whole architecture about how we explain why some people fail. And I didn't really get this because we keep doing what didn't work. So here's a classic example. I grew up in a place that was like Harlem. It was called the South Bronx. I'm 62 years old. When I was in school 57 years ago, the South Bronx had some of the worst schools in New York City, some of the worst schools in New York State. If you go into the South Bronx today, it has some of the worst schools in New York City, some of the worst schools in New York State. And you know something about lousy schools? It's not like a bottle of wine where you say 88 was a good year. Every year is lousy. Now, here's the problem. 57 years ago when I went to school, if I go in those same schools today, they start at the same time, they end at the same time, they're still taught the same way. 57 years of failure, and no one is doing anything different. Everybody's doing exactly what hasn't worked for 57 years, and we're not talking about hundreds of kids or thousands. We're not even talking tens of thousands. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of kids' lives destroyed. Destroyed. Now, if you're an education advocate and you want to go in there and change this system, you are going to get the battle of your life. What is that about? How are we so comfortable letting certain kids fail where other kids, it's expected that they're going to be successful? I thought that in Harlem, we had to do something about that, and I began to try and figure out what to do. Now, I'm going to say a couple of things that people consider very controversial. You may also, but there's a lot of people who don't like me in the States, and I'm in a new country, so I might as well try and get some enemies here too. Here's something I fundamentally believe. This is a radical statement. I say it, and I mean it. I believe education is a profession, a real profession, and I believe if you're an educator and you cannot teach, you should probably find a different profession. Now, I know that sounds, well, some of you are clapping, but someone's tweeting right now, there goes Jeff again, beating up on teachers. I'm not beating up on teachers, right? Kids, they only have education in poor communities. There is no other way out. They are not getting a trust fund. They're not getting an inheritance. They're not going to go and somebody is suddenly going to come in and pave the way for them. They have one chance, and it is by education. My oldest son, who's a lawyer, he called me one day and he said, "Dad, all of my friends are mad with you." I said, "Jerry, why are they mad?" He said, "Because it's all on the internet. You said we should send all the lousy teachers to the upper middle class communities." I said, "Well, I did say that." I said, "But that wasn't the complete quote." I said, "Let me give you the complete quote." I said, if we can't get rid of lousy teachers, we ought to send them all to the middle class and upper middle class communities because those kids can probably get away with one lousy teacher. Instead, we do the opposite. We send the lousy teachers into the schools that need the best teachers. We pretend that teachers don't matter. There is nothing more important to the education of a child than a teacher, and we need to make sure we are putting the best teachers in front of the most disadvantaged students. So let me tell you the second thing. People think this is controversial. In the Harlem Children's Zone, it's 97 blocks, it's 12,000 kids. All of those kids are my kids, and I have one goal for all of my kids. It is college. That's it. It's the only goal. And people are mad that that's my goal for my kids. And people call me, "How come, what do you don't like technical schools?" I said, "I love technical schools. Vocational schools, I love vocational schools, just not for my kids." And they said, "Well, why?" I said, "Well, I have learned as an educator that when educators believe there's more than one option, they begin to decide which kids go to college and which kids don't. And I've seen it done on race, and I've seen it done on class, and I've seen it done on whether or not you're from this zip code or you're from that zip code. Nobody gets to decide who goes to college in my organization except me, and it's everybody. Now, does that mean everybody doesn't go? No, some kids don't. Some kids are college ready. They don't want to go to college. That's up to them. But for me, all of my kids go to college. Now, some of you may think that's controversial, and I'll tell you a little secret I learned. Whenever you're kind of stuck on one of those ethical questions, you're like, "Well, is he right?" This is controversial, but I tell folks, when you don't know what to do what rich people do. That's my controversial statement, all right? Because I'm just saying, I know, but let me tell you how I got there. I know a lot of rich people because I have to raise a lot of money, right? I tried raising money from poor people. It didn't work out so good. I'm just saying. So I noticed this strange phenomenon. Every single rich person I know, every single one, they have one outcome for their child, which is college. I have never seen a wealthy person who has 3 kids and says, "You, I'm thinking I'm sending to Cornell. You, I'm thinking I'm sending to Columbia. But you, I think I'm doing hairdresser school." Never seen it. One outcome, and by the way, I've met a few of their kids. They should probably be thinking about some other outcomes, but they don't. One outcome, it is college. But let me tell you what happens in a community where everybody begins to accept that college is for them. So you go 15 years ago, you go into Harlem, you ask somebody, "Do you know someone in college?" And they'll tell you, "I think there's a girl who lives on 118th Street. I think she's in college." And they would say, "Could you go to college?" I say, "No, you have to be a genius. She's the only one we know in this community that goes to college." Today, I have, just in my program, 930 kids in college. And we're not, it's not an applause line. Let me tell you why that's important. When my kids come home for spring break, when they come home for the summer, most of them come and work in my programs. And so all of my young kids are surrounded with all of these kids who live in Harlem who are in college. To them, it looks like every single kid who's of age is in college. And if you ask them if they're going to college, they're like, "She's in college. I know I could go to college. Are you kidding me?" I mean, it changes the culture, right? So now the culture which used to be abnormal for kids to go to college, now it's the norm. And when kids think the college is norm, and you talk to them about education, it's different. When you say, look, if you can't get grades like that, it's not going to get into college. When they know that's not a fantasy, they begin to act differently about that. So that's one of the basic things that we have for all of our kids, is they have to go into college. Now, here is another thing people find controversial. I believe you have to educate the whole child. I'm a test guy, I'm an evaluation guy, right? I'm a data guy. But I spend as much of my time on the arts and music and recreation. I think we have to get really complete children, and part of the problem is people don't want to pay for what they consider to be non-academic supports and services for kids. And because I have to raise a lot of money, people used to come in my programs, you have to do the dog and pony show, and I was good at it, and they'd walk in, they'd say, well, why are those kids drawing? And I said, oh, it's because of fine motor skills, I have to help my kids with fine motor skills. And they'd come in the gym, and I said, oh no, it's gross motor, right? I had all of these explanations. I got a little older, I got sick of that. Now when someone says, why do you have your kids doing dance? I tell them because I like kids. Right? They want to do dance. Don't you have your kid doing dance? You're not having them do dance because you think it's going to help them in algebra. You're having them do dance because you think it's going to make them happy. It's going to talk to their spirit. It's going to get these kids to feel like they're connected to something that's important, and that's part of our job as educators. So yes, I believe you've got to drive the academic outcomes, but I also believe you've got to deal with the entire child. Now, some of you may get a little, I feel a little picked on this, but please don't, because I found this all over America, and I'm sure it's the same all over the country, all over the world. Because we don't have a real penalty when we fail. We're education business. That's our business. That's the business we're in. We're supposed to be producing young people who can go out and get jobs and take their place and form the next layer of society. There is no penalty for failure. So because there is no penalty for failure, we've allowed failure to become a norm in too many places. And I would just say to you, this is a personal failure of those of us in this business. And often it's because people don't have the courage to stand up and call something what it is. Educators have developed the most elaborate language to explain failure. They will simply not say this thing is a disaster and we need to change it dramatically because it hasn't worked in decades. So let me tell you about this level of accountability I believe we have to have. When we started our charter schools, I remember I'm in Harlem, the schools have been failing for 50 years. I said publicly in a meeting somewhat like this: if I don't have a better school in 5 years than all these traditional schools here in Harlem, I'm going to fire myself. I said it publicly in front of my mayor. I said it in front of my board. I said it in front of the superintendent of schools. So when they all left, this is accountability, I brought my entire team in. I told them, I said, I am going to fire myself in 5 years if this thing is a failure, but I just want you to know I'm going to be the last one leaving. All of you all are going to be gone before me. When you get to a place where you have real accountability, that this is no different than any other business. Who can run a business that fails year after year after year and think they're going to keep their jobs? Where is that even possible except in our business, and only when it's poor children? You can't get away with that when the parents have money and power. You can only do that in places where there's not enough power to hold people accountable. And I think as educators, we've got to stand up. We can't accept this. We've got to look in the mirror and say, if it is failing, we've got to do something different. That's the reason, by the way, that I became so fascinated with GEMS. I just became fascinated with people who are prepared to hold themselves accountable no matter whether they're working with wealthy kids or really poor kids, the same level of attention, the same accountability, the same no nonsense. These kids are going to learn or you're not going to be part of this thing. I think that's important. So, Waiting for Superman was a documentary that they made where when I was a kid, I believed in superheroes. And this is what I've learned in education. If you love your country, if you love your state you're in, the city you're in, the neighborhood you work in, and if you have failing education systems, there is nobody coming to save those kids except you. It is personally up to you. I didn't ask permission in Harlem. I said 12,000. That was the number of kids I was going to take. I'm going to be totally responsible for those kids. And I think we all have to step up to that level of accountability. So let me close with a poem. I love to write poetry for advocates. This poem is called Don't Blame Me. And I wrote this poem because I think as educators, it's time for us to step up, admit what's working, what's not, get help when we need it, right? I tell folk, and this is true, education is the only multi-billion-dollar business that doesn't need any patent attorneys, right? You don't need patent attorneys because you can't even give away a good idea in education, right? People will not follow the science and save these kids. And so my theory is let's take that personal responsibility. So let me close with this poem called Don't Blame Me. The girl's mother said, "Don't blame me. Her father left when she was 3. I know she don't know her ABCs, her 1, 2, 3s, but we are poor and work hard, you see. You know the story. It's don't blame me." The teacher shook her head and said, "Don't blame me. I know it's sad. He's 10, but if the truth be told, he reads like he was 6 years old. And math, don't ask. It's sad, you see. Wish I could do more, but it's after 3. Blame the mom, blame society, blame the system, just don't blame me." The judge was angry, his expression cold. He scowled and said, "Son, you've been told, break the law again and you'll do time. You've robbed with a gun. Have you lost your mind?" The young man opened his mouth to beg. "Save your breath," he heard instead. "Your daddy left when you were 2. Your mama didn't take care of you. Your school prepared you for this fall. Can't read, can't write, can't spell at all. But you did the crime for all to see. You're going to jail, son. Don't blame me." If there is a God or a person supreme, a final reckoning for the kind and the mean, and judgment is rendered on who passed the buck, who blamed the victim, you'll proudly stand up. You'll say to the world, while I couldn't save all, I did not let these children fall. By the thousands, I helped all I could see. No excuses. I took full responsibility. No matter if they were black or white, were cursed, ignored, were wrong or right, were shunned, prejudged, were short or tall, I did my best to save them all. Then I will bear witness for eternity that you can state proudly, don't blame me. Thank you very much.